This Lenoir High Band music was taken from a record, A Living Legend, and also includes an interview with Captain Harper by John Craig. I have used special software to remove as best as I could the scratches and clicks in this very damaged record. I have also raised the volume of Captain Harper's voice, which is too low in this original recording. This was done by Bill Tate, Meadowood Studios, Lenoir, North Carolina.
The selection you just heard was the New Colonial March, played by the 1954 Lenoir High School Band. Captain Harper, do you have any comments on this selection?
This march was by R.B. Hall, who would have written many popular marches at the time, and has had a wide following among the school bands.
Captain Harper, can you give us some information on your early experiences?
I studied violin at Davenport College, which was in operation in the North at that time, and played in an adult orchestra when I was 12 years old. I continued playing in the local orchestra until I went to Davidson College in the fall of 1911. I played for 4 years in the Davidson College Orchestra and was its director in my senior year. And when I went to the University of North Carolina in 1916, I played in the University Orchestra there and made the trips all over the state with their orchestra and glee club. When I went into the military service in 1917, I thought music was behind me. But later on, when I was sent to the South Carolina A&M College at Orangeburg, there was a band in that battalion which I had command of, and I had some connection with their band, although they had a student leader. Later I was transferred to Washington and Lee University at Lexington, Virginia, and we had a larger battalion there, and we also had a band there. I didn't conduct the band personally, but of course I had some arrangements with the director who handled it. That continued until I got out of the Army in 1919 and lived first in New York and then in Winston-Salem. And when my father wanted to retire from the furniture manufacturing business in Lenoir, I came home so as to release him, and I found when I got here, got to Lenoir, that there was an American Legion band which had been operating several months before I returned. They immediately invited me to come and play with them, and I assured them that I was a string player and had no band experience. And they said, well, I could read music and come on and try it. When I went to the first rehearsal, all the instruments were issued, and I didn't want to take an instrument away from some other boy. They said, didn't your father used to play something? I said, yes, he played the flute. Well, you get the flute out and try it. The flute hadn't been played in about 30 years, and it needed to be overhauled and repainted, but we had that done. And while my flute playing was pretty terrible, I got along with those other boys who were learning, and that continued until just the latter part of June, and we were booked to go to Boone, North Carolina, to play for an all-day 4th of July celebration, which Boone was planning. At that time, there were no bands in Boone. We went to Boone as planned, but it rained. It rained nowhere else on earth. It rained crossways and down and every other ways. And so the population of 7 mountain counties went into the courthouse and sat down and said, here we are, come play for us. We knew 6 little beginner band numbers, so we played them from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And our captive audience had nowhere else to go, so they thought it about as well at 5 as they did in the morning. When we got back from this trip, to begin with, the leader of this band had skipped out and gone to parts unknown. So these boys said, you have to lead the band. I'd never led the band. I said, well, we go ahead and try it. Well, in those days, you learned it by the School of Hard Knocks. There was no school, no college that had a training course for bandmasters, and you had to figure things out for yourself, and if it didn't work, try something else. And that was the beginning of the American Legion Band in Lenoir. That continued for about 2 years, but the inevitable happened. Young men who'd come back from the army and wanted somewhere to go at night had gotten married in the meantime. When they'd walked the floor with a sick baby, they hadn't done much trombone practice. And they began turning in instruments, and the Legion had no new blood to take their place. And so here were instruments being turned in, and the band was shrinking. And I was conductor of this Legion band, but I couldn't keep on giving my time and attention to it if the band members weren't going to be there to profit by it. So we discussed various alternatives and decided to give the set of instruments, 24 of them, to the Lenoir High School band to found a high school band. Well, the high school authorities weren't very enthusiastic about having a band. They weren't particularly overjoyed at the idea. And the Legion was somewhat begrudging about giving the instruments away, but they couldn't think of anything else to satisfy the public that raised the money for them. And so the contract was made between the American Legion and the school board that if the newly organized high school band would go to pieces within 2 years, the instruments would come back to the American Legion folks. It's needless to say they've never gone back.
How did the band continue from this beginning? Did you have some outside help?
Well, we had some Saturday help. Some neighboring musicians would come in on Saturdays and help us train individuals. I did all the conducting of the band itself. Later on, we hired 2 or 3 of my former pupils to work with us: Hubert Hayes, Kermit Bolick, Francis McGill, and others. And in time, the band kept growing, and there were more and more students coming in, and the work was getting heavier and heavier. And up to this point, I'd been working in the furniture factory office in the daytime and doing this work at night. But the work was getting too big to be done that way, and so I was offered the principalship of Lenoir High School and to do the band work on the side, which I did until 1929. By that time, the band had grown to the point where we thought it was a man's full-time job, and somebody else took over the principalship of the high school, and from that time until my retirement, it was a whole-time job of doing the high school band only.
How many beginning band students were there in 1924?
We only had 24 instruments. We could have had all the boys in high school if we'd had enough instruments for them, but the Legion gave us 24 instruments, and 1 or 2 boys had instruments of their own, and all profits of concerts and everything else were put into buying more equipment. This high school was so sure that the whole thing was going to flop that they made us put half of our earnings in the stage curtain, and we could only have part of what we earned, but we kept adding all the time. The very first project was to raise money for cases for the instruments we already had. The Legion didn't have cases for their instruments. And later on, we'd add instruments after each concert, buying 1 more instrument, or usually second-hand instruments, and we had them as rapidly as we could. And it was some years before we had a regular fund drive for equipment. Our early uniforms were a cape and cap with white trousers, and it was not till some years after that we had regular uniforms.
We will now listen to the 1966 Lenoir High School Band. performing La Forza del Destino. Captain Harper, can you give us some information about this selection?
Verdi wrote quite a number of operas which were successful, and La Forza del Destino, or The Force of Destiny, is a good example. The story will not be given here, but it has quite a variety of music. It's very tuneful and is always played with a great deal of pleasure.
What about the early contest? I know you went just as soon as you could, so to speak. How about a little information on those?
The state contest, state music contest in North Carolina was the brainchild of Dr. Wade R. Brown, who at that time was Dean of Music at the Women's College of the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. The first contests were a bunch of pianists, and I think the first contest they had was nothing but pianists. A little later they added vocal solos, and then vocal choruses. And finally in 1925 they had staged the first orchestra contest. In 1926 they decided to add bands, and the first bands that ever played in a contest in North Carolina were Winston-Salem under Christian Kaczynski, Greensboro under Grady Miller, and Lenoir with yours truly. Three bands played and we came out third. However, the next year there were 6 bands. Chapel Hill, Shelby, and Asheville had all come into the contest, and so Dr. Brown divided the bands into Class A, schools of more than 1,000 students, and Class B, students less than that number. We won the Class B contest that year and won it for the next 3 or 4 years until we were in danger of killing the Class B contest by winning too many. So we voluntarily went into Class A, although we were much smaller than any of our competitors, and we didn't suppose we'd ever do better than last place. However, in 1929, the Depression hit. Most of the bands in North Carolina, all that were receiving tax money, were disbanded, went out of business, their instruments were scattered, and only 2 high school bands survived, the ones at Central High in Charlotte and the one in Lenoir. Neither of those were dependent on tax money and therefore weren't hit by the reduction in taxes. By the time the Depression was over, Lenoir and Charlotte were in high gear and everybody else was having to rebuild if they had any band at all. The instruments had usually been scattered and lost, and they had to raise funds and start all over again with new directors, new students, new instruments, new everything. And consequently, we were somewhat ahead of the other. The first contest that was held after the Depression, the contest had been discontinued for 2 or 3 years during the Depression. The first one held after the Depression was so obvious that we in Charlotte were ahead of the others that the other bandmasters asked us to stay out for a year until they could get on their feet, which we did. We went and played the contest for exhibition, but not as contestants. And by the next year, when they let us contest, we were pretty well toward the top. And we've been pretty well up there ever since. We have, for 37 years, have reached a superior rating.
I was going to mention that this is 37 consecutive superior ratings. Quite a feat. In fact, you are then, of course, the oldest continuous band in North Carolina. This is your 49th year, is that not correct?
That's correct.
We mentioned equipment, the early equipment, which you mentioned didn't even have cases for some of the instruments. What about facility, though, to rehearse? Where was this done in the early days?
That was a burden that the school board were not very enthused about, but they told us we could use one of the basement classrooms, which had a concrete floor, hard plastered ceilings, blackboards around 3 walls, and glass windows on the other side. A most perfect tin bucket in the early days.
Sure.
We had 2 little lonesome light bulbs in there, and why we didn't all lose our eyesight has never been fully explained. But we did our early practicing in there, and of course the acoustics under those conditions were terrible. There are certain instruments we could not hear. They were covered up in echo. We'd go to the contest, and for the first time hear them, and they were playing wrong. And we labored under those conditions until 1937. In 1937, we raised money outside the taxpayers' budget and built the first half of our present band building. We planned at that time to build double the amount that we had the money to build, but we built as much as we had funds for and had the architect's plan for the rest of it as at a later date. That later date came about 5 years ago, and we completed our original plan. The only part that we haven't put on the plan that was originally planned was the elevator. We've never had the elevator yet. The building is fireproof construction of acoustical treatment throughout, and has given admirable service in practice rooms, rehearsal rooms, office, storage rooms, furnace room, all the equipment necessary for good music teaching. It's worked out very well, and a great deal that we've accomplished has been due to such good facilities.
We will now hear from the 1969 Lenoir High School Band under the direction of Captain James C. Harper. The selection is Prelude and Siciliana from Cavaliere Rusticana by Mascagni. What is the present membership of the band?
We have about 84 members in the band right now, and we'll take that many to this year's contest, we think.
What is the largest number you've had with the band?
We've had as many as 110, which is a little crowded for our band rehearsal room. But when our high school authorities took the 9th grade from the senior high school and moved it to the junior high school, within 1 year they cut it down from 110 to 52. We've since I've been building it back up, and we have it now to 84.
So you say that numbers are not important.
Numbers up to a certain point are helpful, provided the students can all play their instruments properly. You get beyond 70 or 80 or 90, you're mere duplicating what you have, and you run the risk of having a lack of precision if some student is earlier or later than some other student. One student can muddy up the playing of another student, and too big a number is likely to involve that unless they're very, very confined players.
Could you name some of the many famous musicians who have performed with the Lenoir High School band through the years?
We've been very fortunate in having a number of people, musicians, who have worked with us. Percy Granger, during his lifetime, came to Lenoir and gave a concert with the Lenoir High School band. Part of the time he was playing the piano, part of the time he was playing the piano with the band, part of the time he was conducting the band. The students were greatly thrilled to work under his stick and look forward to that as a great experience. Another case that we had of notable who worked with us was John Tyers, a baritone of New York City, who gave a concert with the Lenoir High School band, and when he was to take his train to leave, the band took him in their bus as far as Hickory and gave him a send-off. Another one was Elwood Gary, who was a tenor and who sang with the band. Possibly the biggest thrill the band had in all was singing with the Metropolitan Opera star Dorothy Kirsten, who came to Lenoir and gave a concert with the band. Her brother George Kirsten, who at that time was conducted the numbers that she sang in, and the rest of us handled the numbers for which she was between her numbers.
Captain Harper, what are some of your favorite band compositions?
A good many early works were written for the small bands of the 1890s to 1900, which were usually brass, very small woodwind sections, and they're rather crude arrangements as we would want them now with our larger symphonic band. A good many of those older numbers many of them are transcriptions of orchestral works, and a great many of them have been rewritten or reorganized since that to take care of modern instrumentation. The early composers wrote prolifically for the orchestra, but very sparingly for the band, because the band of that day was a very crude affair. Even in my early experience, the old instruction books were full of hints on how to compensate for an out-of-tune instrument, and most of the manufactured instruments of that day were out of tune. That's all been drastically changed. The manufacturers have come a long way in developing fine instruments now, well in tune, and the instruction books today don't have that sort of hints in them. But the larger bands, full symphonic size, require bigger instrumentation for their music, and it's more sheets, more library space, and all of that sort of thing. And so, consequently, the great many of these older numbers have been rewritten. If the great composers of the past had had the opportunity to write for band instruments of the kind we have today, a great many of them would have written for band, just as they did write for the orchestra. The orchestra, of course, with stringed instruments, could compensate and put the instrument in tune if it wasn't in tune in the first place. That was not possible on brass and woodwind instruments of the earlier day. It is possible today. And consequently, the modern symphonic band can do most everything the orchestra can do if it has equally good players.
Who are some of your favorite composers?
We have found that the Richard Wagner's compositions are especially usable by a band. Of course, he wrote for the orchestra because he's writing for the theater. But he featured the very things that we have the most of. And most Wagnerian compositions can be well played by a band because we have the very things that he specialized in, such things as trumpets and trombones and some of the brass instruments and some of the woodwind instruments. And so we think those are especially good. I've always been very fond of the compositions of Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, of course, wrote at a later date. By the time he was writing, they had the Boehm system clarinets and the Boehm system of flutes and other instruments which had a greater capacity and were better in tune, and he took advantage of that sort of thing. There are a great many other composers who have written music that is adaptable to band and plays well. The Holst suites in England were very good. The writings of course, John Philip Sousa were worldwide known. We think of Sousa as the March King, but he wrote many other things besides marches. He wrote 2 or 3 operettas. He wrote several suites. He wrote quite a variety of things. He's most famous for his marches, but he had a much wider range of composing.
And from the 1972 Lenoir High School Band, we hear the entry march of the Boyars.
The Boyars were a lesser order of nobility in Romania. They were very proud and haughty people. The story is told that they were invited to a banquet and were furious because their chairs at the banquet did not have cushions. They were wearing very elaborate velvet cloaks, and when they left their cloaks on their chairs. And someone said, "You're leaving your cloaks." They said, "We don't carry off our cushions when we go from supper." But this procession is written by Harold Borson, who was a pupil of Grieg's in Norway. It's a very striking number, and it sounds very much like Grieg, as we expect one of his pupils to sound.
Captain Harper, what is your opinion on the use of transcriptions in band literature? I know many band directors feel we should only play contemporary compositions.
I don't think you could have a broad gauge salient opinion either against or for contemporary music entirely. I think the well-educated student should know some of both. I have very hearty respect for a good transcription. I've known some very poor transcriptions, but if the transcription is well made and adapted to the instrumentation of the modern band, I think it's quite a fine thing to have some transcriptions, because I think there's a wealth of fine music of the past, which if no one ever played transcriptions, the modern generation would never have even heard, and obviously wouldn't have enjoyed. And so I believe in transcriptions. I don't think I wouldn't play always transcriptions, and I think some modern music is very worthwhile and is worth knowing and playing. But I'm very willing to play transcriptions. Either band or orchestra is the better if they got the better players. But bands with modern equipment can do almost as well as the orchestra can, and in certain types of things fully as well.
What is needed to start a band today?
The first and most essential thing is a capable director. He can usually solve most of the problems if he's given time and cooperation. And the school that economizes on the director had better forget about having bands, because a poor one can destroy not only that particular effort, but future efforts as well. There have been times in the past when some of the instrument salespeople would send a man around to the school to organize a band, with the understanding that he would stay till the band gave its first concert. And usually timed that about the time he collected the last dollar on what they paid for the instruments and then left. If the community had a person who was capable of running the band, he should have started it himself, started from the first, and laid the right kind of foundations. If they had nobody of that sort, they'd better not start a band, because they'd merely have disappointment and waste money on instruments, which would be scattered.
What about the state contest system as it is today?
I think the state contest has done more to develop public school music than any other thing that's been done in North Carolina. Some people have found fault with it. Sometimes people have been disappointed in the judging they've received and that sort of thing. But taken as a whole, it's spread music where music would not have been otherwise, and I think it's been a great force for developing both youngsters and music.
Could you describe a typical day of instruction at Lenoir?
Our work begins in the 6th grade. We have teachers who teach 6th grade bands, of course, very elementary bands. Then 7th, 8th, and 9th are grades in our junior high school, and we have a teacher who gives full time to training first a beginner band and also a more experienced band in the junior high school. Students who come from the junior high school to the senior high school, of course, have had about 3 years of playing experience and are past the elementary stages. We have 3 full-time musicians and 1 very capable secretary in the Lenoir High School band. All of them stay busy, and every student in the band is in the band building at least twice, football season 3 times a day. The marching exercises take place during the football season and are held in the morning before school, and are all over by the time the school opens in the morning. Sometime during the day, when the student has a vacant period and can spare the time, he comes to the band building and has an individual lesson at least once a week, sometimes almost every day, depending on the number of other students there at the time. And he also does some ensemble playing in that lesson period. In the afternoon, the whole band assembles and goes through a period of training with a daily rehearsal and a tremendous library of music to draw on, and that is largely our program.
From the 1962 Lenoir High School band, we'll hear Zampa.
Zampa is another obsolete opera. Zampa, according to the story, was a pirate, and he came to his foul end by a marble statue of the girl that he had wronged, which fell on him and killed him. The opera itself was never a great success and is no longer given, but the overture is in the repertory of all good bands and orchestras, and is a very typical piece of Italian music.
Could you tell us about your education and some of the awards you have received through the years?
I graduated in Lenoir High School in 1911 and entered Davidson College that fall. I graduated at Davidson in 1915 with B.S. degree and entered the University of North Carolina that fall for an M.A. degree, which I received in 1916. I was in the college orchestra all the time I was at Davidson and was leader of it in my senior year. I was in the university orchestra at the University of North Carolina and played off the same desk with the concertmaster in that orchestra. And I've had to do a music experience of various sorts since that. I grew up in a family orchestra, which we had 4 or 5 pieces, all members of the family, and that had the advantage we'd have a few minutes after supper or some odd time that you couldn't have got it together, a big group together. I learned a great deal from all those experiences, and of course did some amateur playing in New York City when I was there, and I played in the Columbia University Orchestra when I was up there studying conducting.
When did you receive your doctor's degree?
My honorary doctor's degree came from Davidson College in 1965. It was quite an honor, which I've always appreciated.
Captain Harper, could you tell us about some of the honors you have received during your association with the Lenoir High Band?
I became president of the American Bandmasters Association in 1948 and was chairman of its board the next year. I also belonged to the American School Band Directors Association, was one of its founders, but I have not tried to attend its conventions since I retired.
What advice can you give to parents whose child is starting in instrumental music?
Anything which teaches a knowledge and understanding of music will help. Sometimes piano lessons are advantaged because that teaches 2 clefs and the ability to read. And of course, individual instruction is always better than group instruction. Group instruction is better than none. But individual instructions can find the needs of that particular student and hasten his progress. No amount of instruction will amount to much unless the student wants to learn, is interested in what he's doing, and puts his own best effort into it. If the student is going to do only what he's prodded to do, he's probably wasting his time in music. But if he continues on his work and does faithful practice, the better instruction he gets, the more of it, the better.
What are your plans for the future?
If you mean the plans for the band, we want to continue as long as we can. The danger of school mergers may destroy some of our plans, but as long as we're allowed to continue, we hope to continue as we are. My plans, of course, I am reaching an advanced age when I'm not much used to the band anymore. I still go to the building whenever they let me and do some teaching and a little conducting and get a thrill out of that much contact with youth.
Well, I think you're being modest. We know that you do direct at each concert and are with the band at every trip, and we hope to see you there for a long time.
Thank you. This number has always been a great favorite of mine. Tchaikovsky wrote some very beautiful music and some music that's very well adapted to band. And I have enjoyed his 4th, 5th, and 6th symphonies, of which I believe that the 5th is my favorite.
and gentlemen, the alma mater.
Please support our Caldwell Heritage Museum, 112 Vaden Street, Lenoir, North Carolina, and please visit and support Lenoir and Caldwell County History on Facebook. Thank you.